Ellen DeGeneres froze mid-sentence, her eyes locked on Oprah Winfrey sitting across from her. The studio audience held their breath as two of television's most powerful women stared at each other in complete silence. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become the most emotional moment in daytime TV history. Because sometimes, when legends collide over a secret that could break your heart, magic doesn't just happen, it explodes across millions of souls. Nobody in that Warner Bros. Dick studio knew they were about to witness something unprecedented. Not the cameras rolling, not the producers frantically adjusting their headsets, and certainly not Sarah Mitchell, the 42-year-old elementary school teacher from rural Oklahoma who thought she was just there to meet her hero Ellen. But Ellen knew. Ellen had been planning this moment for 4 weeks, ever since a package had arrived at her office that made her call Oprah personally and say 6 words that would change everything. "We need to save a teacher." The package wasn't typical fan mail. It was a handmade book, bound with yarn and covered in crayon drawings. Inside, 23 second graders had written letters in their careful, crooked handwriting. "Dear Ellen, our teacher Mrs. Mitchell is the best teacher in the world, but she's very sick and we're scared. She won't tell us what's wrong, but we heard her crying in the supply closet. She always takes care of us, but nobody takes care of her. Can you help? Love, Room 12. But this is where the story gets incredible. Because Ellen didn't just read those letters. She investigated. She called the school. She spoke to the principal. And what she discovered made her do something she'd never done in 20 years of hosting. She cried in her dressing room and immediately picked up the phone to call the one person she knew could help make miracles happen. Now, as Sarah sat in that guest chair wearing her best dress, a simple navy one she'd bought at Target specifically for this moment, she had no idea that her entire world was about to transform. Ellen leaned forward, her voice carrying that familiar warmth, but with an undertone of something deeper, something more purposeful. "Sarah, tell me about your students. 23 second graders must keep you busy." Sarah's face lit up immediately. Despite everything she was going through, talking about her students always brought joy to her eyes. The studio audience, 300 people strong, could feel the genuine love radiating from this small-town teacher. "Oh my goodness, they're incredible," Sarah said, her voice filled with pride. "They're curious about everything. Last week, little Timmy asked me why clouds don't fall down, and before I knew it, we spent the entire afternoon building a weather station out of cardboard boxes and plastic bottles." Ellen smiled, but she was studying Sarah's face. In 20 years of interviewing guests, she had developed an instinct for reading people. And everything about Sarah, the slight fatigue in her eyes, the way she unconsciously touched her scarf, the forced brightness in her voice, told Ellen this woman was carrying something heavier than lesson plans. "That sounds amazing. How long have you been teaching?" 20 years this fall," Sarah replied. "Same school, same grade. I always say I have the best job in the world because I get to see the moment when everything clicks for a child. When they finally understand something they've been struggling with, and their whole face just lights up. There's nothing like it." Ellen nodded, then leaned closer. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal? Your students sent me something, and I want to know, how are you taking care of yourself while you're taking care of everyone else?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her smile faltered for just a moment, and Ellen caught it. The studio audience sensed the shift too, the energy becoming more intimate, more serious. I'm fine," Sarah said quietly, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "Teachers are pretty good at taking care of ourselves. We have to be." Ellen studied her face. "Are you though? Are you really fine?" For a moment Sarah looked like she might deflect again, but something in Ellen's tone, genuine concern, not talk show curiosity, broke through her defenses. "It's been challenging," Sarah admitted, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "but my students don't need to worry about my problems. They need me to be their teacher." "What kind of challenges, Sarah?" The studio was completely quiet now. Ellen had stopped following any script, any interview plan. This was just two human beings having a real conversation in front of millions of viewers. Sarah took a shaky breath. "I was diagnosed with leukemia 6 months ago. Stage 3. The treatments are expensive, really expensive, and I've used up all my sick days, but I can't afford to take unpaid leave because I need the insurance. So I go to chemo on Friday afternoons and spend the weekend recovering so I can be back in my classroom Monday morning." The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row had tears in their eyes. Ellen felt her own eyes filling up, but she didn't look away from Sarah. "Sweetheart, you've been going through cancer treatment and still teaching full-time?" Sarah nodded, tears starting to fall. My students don't know. I wear scarves to cover the hair loss, and I try to hide the fatigue. They just think I've developed a love for headwear, she said with a watery laugh. I don't want them to be scared or worried. They're 7 years old. They should be thinking about spelling tests and playground games, not whether their teacher is going to be okay. But Ellen wasn't just listening as a talk show host anymore. She was listening as someone who was about to deliver news that would change Sarah's life forever. Because sitting backstage, watching this conversation on a monitor, was Oprah Winfrey. Sarah, Ellen said, standing up from her chair, there's someone here who's been listening to our conversation. Someone who has some thoughts about teachers, about heroes, and about making sure the people who take care of everyone else get taken care of too. Sarah looked confused. What do you mean? Ellen walked toward the wings of the stage, and the studio audience began to murmur with anticipation. They could sense something big was about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, Ellen announced, please welcome someone who needs no introduction, Mr. Oprah Winfrey. The studio erupted. 300 people jumped to their feet, screaming, applauding, crying. But Ellen was watching Sarah, who had gone completely still. Her mouth fell open, her hands flew to her heart, and then she started sobbing. Oprah Winfrey, media mogul, philanthropist, and one of the most influential women in the world, walked directly to Sarah's chair. She was carrying a beautiful gift bag, but more importantly, she was carrying an expression of pure love and determination. Hello, beautiful, Oprah said, sitting down next to Sarah, and immediately taking her hands. I heard you've been taking care of everyone but yourself. Sarah couldn't speak. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, staring at the woman whose empire was built on education, empowerment, and lifting others up. But this is where the story becomes something nobody expected, something that would change not just Sarah's life, but how America thought about teachers, about sacrifice, about the heroes who shape our children's minds while fighting their own battles. Oprah looked directly into Sarah's eyes. Can I tell you something? Ellen called me 4 weeks ago and told me about a teacher in Oklahoma who was quietly saving children while she was dying, and I said to myself, not on my watch. The studio audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Sarah, honey, you are exactly the kind of person who changes the world one child at a time, and it's time someone changed your world back. Oprah reached into her gift bag and pulled out an envelope. But it wasn't just any envelope. It was thick, official-looking, with the Oprah Winfrey Foundation seal. Inside this envelope is a check that will cover all of your medical expenses. All of them. From now until you're completely healthy. You're never going to worry about choosing between chemotherapy and paying rent again. Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The audience erupted again, but Oprah held up her hand. But that's not all. Ellen told me you've been spending your own money you don't have, buying school supplies for your students because your school district doesn't have enough funding. Sarah nodded through her tears. It was true. Even while paying for cancer treatment, she'd been using her credit cards to buy pencils, notebooks, art supplies, even snacks for kids who came to school hungry. Oprah smiled that famous Oprah smile. Well, I've just made a donation to your school district. Every classroom in your entire district will be fully funded for the next 5 years. Books, supplies, technology, field trips, everything your students need to succeed. The studio audience was on their feet again, but Oprah wasn't finished. And Sarah, because you've shown us what real heroism looks like, I want to do something else. I'm starting a new initiative called Oprah's Teachers, where we identify educators like you, who are making extraordinary sacrifices for their students. Every month, we're going to surprise a teacher with full funding for their classroom, medical support if they need it, and a year's salary so they can focus on healing and teaching without financial stress. Sarah was sobbing now, but they were tears of disbelief, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude. For 6 months, she had been carrying the weight of her illness alone, trying to protect her students, while managing impossible financial pressure. And now, in the span of 5 minutes, that burden had been lifted completely. But Ellen had one more surprise. She walked over and knelt beside both women. Sarah, your students sent me that book of letters because they love you. They see how much you sacrifice for them, even when you try to hide it. So I called them this morning. Ellen gestured toward a large screen that descended from the ceiling of the studio. On it appeared 23 little faces, Sarah's second-grade class, gathered in their classroom around a computer. Surprise, Mrs. Mitchell, they shouted in unison, their little voices filling the studio. We love you. Sarah completely broke down. Seeing her students, knowing they cared enough to reach out for help, watching them beam with pride as they saw their teacher with Ellen and Oprah. It was too much joy for one heart to hold. Little Timmy, the boy who'd asked about clouds, was front and center. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you going to be okay now?" Sarah wiped her tears and leaned toward the camera. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to be more than okay. I'm going to be the best teacher you've ever had." "You already are," shouted a little girl named Emma. "We drew you pictures." The class held up artwork they'd made, crayon drawings of Sarah with words like "best teacher" and "we love you" and "get well soon" written in their careful second-grade handwriting. Ellen looked at the camera, tears streaming down her own face. "You know what, folks? This is why we do this show. Not for the laughs, though we love those too, but for moments like this, moments when we remember that heroes walk among us every day, often invisible, always essential." She turned to Sarah and Oprah. "Sarah, you taught us something today. You taught us that real strength isn't about never needing help. It's about continuing to give even when you have nothing left to give yourself. And Oprah, you reminded us that when we have the power to change someone's life, we have the responsibility to do it." The show ended with Sarah, Ellen, and Oprah in a three-way hug, while 23 second graders cheered from the screen behind them, but the real story was just beginning. 3 months later, Sarah was in remission. The experimental treatment that Oprah's funding had made possible was working. Her hair was growing back, her energy was returning, and she was back in her classroom full-time, not because she had to be, but because she wanted to be. But more importantly, Oprah's teachers had become a nationwide movement. In its first year, the initiative helped over 500 teachers facing medical, financial, or personal crises. The ripple effect was enormous. Better supported teachers meant better education for thousands of children across the country. Sarah's school district, now fully funded thanks to Oprah's donation, became a model for what public education could look like when teachers had the resources they needed. Test scores improved, but more importantly, children were excited to learn. They felt supported, valued, engaged. Sarah herself became an advocate for teacher support and healthcare reform. She spoke at education conferences, sharing her story and emphasizing that teachers shouldn't have to choose between their health and their calling. Her message was simple but powerful. We teach children that asking for help is brave. Maybe it's time we adults remembered that lesson too. 6 months after the Ellen Show appearance, Sarah received a letter that made her cry all over again. It was from Timmy, the boy who'd asked about clouds. He was now in 3rd grade, but he wrote, "Dear Mrs. Mitchell, I hope you know that watching you be brave made me want to be brave too. When I grow up, I want to help people like Miss Oprah helped you. Thank you for teaching me that heroes can be sick and still be heroes." Ellen kept a photo from that day in her dressing room. Sarah, Oprah, and herself laughing together while Sarah held that envelope that changed everything. Every time she looked at it, she remembered why she loved her job. Not for the celebrity interviews or the comedy sketches, but for moments when television became a force for real change. Oprah, meanwhile, expanded Oprah's Teachers into a permanent foundation. To date, it has supported over 10,000 educators and provided funding for educational resources that have reached more than 2 million students. But she always says the program's success isn't measured in numbers. It's measured in teachers like Sarah, who can focus on what they do best because they know they're supported. And Sarah? She's still teaching, still inspiring 7-year-olds to ask questions about clouds and everything else, still staying late to help struggling students, and arriving early to set up special projects. But now she does it with the security of knowing that her health is protected, her classroom is funded, and her sacrifice is recognized. Her students don't know the full story of what happened that day on Ellen. They're too young to understand medical bills and financial stress, but they do know their teacher is happy, healthy, and has everything she needs to make their classroom magical. And really, that's all that matters. Because that's the real magic of that day with Ellen and Oprah. It wasn't just about one teacher getting help. It was about creating a system where teachers, all teachers, can focus on what they do best, changing the world one child at a time. Every morning, Sarah walks into room 12 and sees 23 faces looking up at her with curiosity, trust, and love. And every morning, she remembers that being brave enough to ask for help didn't make her a better teacher. It made her a better human being, and sometimes that's the most important lesson of all. The crayon drawing that started it all, 23 second graders' plea for their beloved teacher, still hangs framed in Ellen's office. Next to it is a photo from Sarah's classroom, taken 6 months after her recovery was complete. In it, Sarah is surrounded by her students, all of them grinning at the camera. At the bottom, in Sarah's handwriting, are the words, "Heroes helping heroes." Thank you for teaching us all what love looks like. Share this story if you believe teachers deserve our support. Comment below if you've ever had a teacher who changed your life. And remember, the heroes who shape our children's futures are often fighting battles we can't see. Maybe it's time we made sure they know they're not fighting alone. Because in the end, that's what Oprah, Ellen, and Sarah taught us that day. That the strongest people are often the ones who need help the most. That asking for support isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And that sometimes, the most important lesson happens not in a classroom, but on a talk show stage, where two powerful women reminded the world that teachers are treasures worth protecting. The lesson continues in classrooms across America, where teachers like Sarah wake up every day ready to change the world. And now, thanks to one brave teacher and two incredible women who refused to let her fight alone, they have the support they need to keep performing miracles, one student at a time.